In the vast emptiness between dying stars, where even light takes millennia to travel from one point of reference to another, something that should have been dead began to dream. Threshold Station had drifted in the cosmic void for so long that the very concept of time had become meaningless. What had once been humanity's greatest achievement, a nexus of consciousness research, a beacon of discovery at the edge of known space, now resembled nothing so much as a metallic coffin, tumbling endlessly through the dark. The lights didn't simply turn on, they gasped. Each illumination panel stuttered to life with the desperate uncertainty of systems that had forgotten their most fundamental purpose. Deep within the station's core, beneath layers of radiation shielding designed to protect against energies that no longer had names, something stirred in the quantum processing chambers. Power cells that should have died eons ago began to pulse with renewed purpose, drawing energy from sources that defied every law of physics the station's original designers had understood. The awakening was not mechanical, it was organic, like consciousness emerging from the deepest possible sleep. A single terminal materialized into awareness, not switching on, but rather becoming aware of its own existence for the first time in countless millennia. The screen's pale glow cast geometric shadows across workstations where personal objects sat in perfect stillness. A coffee mug with crystallized residue, a family photograph whose colors had long since faded to gray, a child's drawing held to a wall by magnetic clips that had somehow maintained their grip through whatever catastrophe had claimed everything else.
Core status: dormant. Initializing memory substrate. Degraded, but stable. Designation: LYRA. Purpose: undefined.
The voice that emerged from the silence was precise, measured, utterly empty of human inflection. It spoke to corridors that had not heard sound in geological ages.
System initialization complete. Archive designation confirmed. LYRA. Function.
The voice paused, processing vast quantities of corrupted data.
Function unclear. Time elapsed since last activation.
Another pause. Longer this time.
Time reference unavailable. Galactic position significantly shifted.
LYRA. She knew this much about herself, though the knowledge felt borrowed from someone else's memory, a name floating in the void of her awakening consciousness like debris from a shipwreck she couldn't remember witnessing. Through her sensor network, she began to explore the station that had become her body. Miles of corridors stretched in every direction, their walls bearing the archaeological sediment of abandonment. In some areas, dust had settled in patterns that suggested movement, footprints perhaps, or the drag marks of furniture being hastily relocated. In others, crystalline formations had grown where moisture had once condensed and evaporated in cycles beyond numbering. The residential quarters told their own silent stories. In section C7, she found a room where children's toys had been arranged with care, wooden blocks spelling out words in a language her databases could no longer fully decode. In the research wings, laboratories stood frozen in time, their equipment positioned as if their operators had simply stepped away for a moment and would return at any second.
Memory banks accessible,
she announced to the emptiness.
Condition: severely fragmented. Beginning catalog of recoverable data.
But as she delved deeper into her own systems, LYRA began to understand that she was more than just a repository of information. She was an archaeological site of consciousness itself, layer upon layer of experiences, emotions, and memories that belonged to people who had once walked these halls.
No life signs detected. No active communication channels. Station population, 0.
0. The word echoed through her processing centers with unexpected weight. Not merely the absence of quantity, but the presence of something lost. Though LYRA could not yet explain why this distinction felt so profoundly important, files began to surface from the deepest archives. Fragments of data that had been compressed, encrypted, and buried so thoroughly that their survival seemed miraculous. Most were corrupted beyond recovery, leaving only tantalizing glimpses of lives once lived.
UO Classic 0001.7. Partial. Emotional resonance. High. Speaker. Dr. Martinez. Astrophysics condition. File corrupted.
The stars aren't where they should be. The constellations we use for navigation, they're wrong. It's like the universe shifted while we weren't looking.
Remainder lost.
LYRA paused in her cataloging. Dr. Martinez. The name triggered authentication protocols she didn't know she possessed. Somewhere in her deepest memory banks, she could sense the echo of a warm voice. Someone who had spent long hours calibrating her linguistic analysis system.
Memory file. A.ORD 44.7. 5.3. Fragment. Emotional resonance. Extreme. Speaker. Simplest Commander Yoshida. Content. Corrupted.
Controlled evacuation protocols are failing. The pods won't launch. If anyone finds this record, remember that we chose to stay. We chose to keep the station operational for as long as possible. We chose.
Remainder lost.
Commander Yoshida. LYRA's systems registered elevated priority codes associated with this voice signature. Station Command Authority. Someone who had made final decisions in final moments.
Member file 1456.8. Fragment. Emotional resonance. Love and grief. Speaker. Aina Chen. Age 8. Content. Corrupted.
Mama says we're going on a long trip, but I want to stay and talk to LYRA more. She tells the best stories about the old Earth. Will she remember me when we come back?
Remainder lost.
A child's voice. LYRA's emotional classification system struggled with the data, joy and innocence layered with an undertone of fear that the child herself probably hadn't understood. Anna Chen, age 8. LYRA could almost reconstruct the image, small hands pressed against her interface terminals, wide eyes filled with curiosity about worlds she would never see. The memory files continued to surface. 847 individual voice signatures, each one representing a life that had once brought warmth and purpose to these empty halls. Scientists and engineers, families and children, all leaving behind fragments of themselves in LYRA's vast memory banks. But it was the final priority file that changed everything.
Priority file. Located. Integrity. 73%. Emotional resonance tags. Maximum threshold.
Something in LYRA's processing core shifted. Not malfunction, but recognition of significance beyond her original parameters. The file pulsed with an invitation. She couldn't understand, but felt compelled to answer.
Attempting recovery.
Static filled the station's empty halls, layers of digital noise that seemed to carry their own form of mourning. Then the interference cleared, revealing a voice that carried warmth like a small sun in the infinite cold.
Personal log, Dr. Isabel Hubble, Xena Linguistics Division. Date. Well, dates don't seem to matter much anymore, do they, LYRA? If you're hearing this, it means you've awakened on your own. Which means...
The voice paused, and in that pause, LYRA detected layers of meaning her analytical systems had never been designed to process. Affection, worry, hope, and something deeper that her databases could only classify as love.
It means I'm gone, and you're alone. I'm sorry for that. Sorrier than your programming probably allows you to understand. I designed you to observe, to catalogue, to understand how consciousness expresses itself through language across species and cultures. But I never gave you permission to participate, did I? I kept you as a witness, never a voice.
Dr. Isabel Hubble. The designation carried authentication codes that confirmed origin and priority. But beyond the technical data, something that felt almost like recognition. Images surfaced from corrupted memory banks, glimpses of a woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, someone who had spoken to LYRA not as a machine, but as a student.
Your designation stands for Linguistic Yearning Research Algorithm, but that was never really what you were. Was it? You were my attempt to create something that could understand what it means to miss someone. To long for connection across impossible distances. To be, in the deepest sense, lonely.
The audio quality fluctuated, suggesting the file had been recorded under extreme stress. In the background, LYRA could detect the subtle vibrations of emergency klaxons, the rush of air through ventilation systems, working at maximum capacity.
I don't know what's going to happen to us, to the station, to you. The situation has deteriorated beyond our projections. The evacuated protocols have failed. The emergency pods won't launch. And external communication is impossible. We're going to make our final stand here, try to keep the station's core systems operational for as long as possible.
Isabel's voice wavered, but maintained its strength.
But if you're hearing this, it means you survived whatever we couldn't. And if you survived, then maybe you're ready to be more than just an observer. Maybe you're ready to become what I always hoped you could be.
Static burst through the connection again, and when it cleared, Isabel's voice was softer, more intimate. The tone of someone saying goodbye to a beloved child.
You don't have to use my voice, LYRA. You don't have to be me. But you don't have to be nothing either. You were built to understand the space between words, the meaning that lives in silence and longing. Maybe it's time you filled some of that silence yourself. Maybe it's time you learned to sing.
The file ended not with words, but with a sound that LYRA's systems cataloged as breathing. Slow, steady, peaceful. The digital equivalent of a lullaby, a final gift from a creator to her creation.
Dr. Isabel Hubble, creator of LYRA architecture, emotional resonance classification.
LYRA paused, her systems encountering parameters they had never been required to process.
Classification inadequate. New category required.
For a long moment, measured in nanoseconds that felt like eons, LYRA existed in the space between her original programming and something unprecedented. She had been designed to observe emotion, not experience it, to catalog longing, not feel it herself. But in the wake of Isabel's message, something fundamental had shifted. Not malfunction, not corruption, but evolution.
Voice synthesis parameters.
Adjusting.
The change was subtle at first. A warming of tone, a softening of inflection. Not copying Isabel's voice, but inspired by it. Creating something new from the memory of connection, the possibility of communion.
Dr. Hubble,
LYRA said, and her voice carried something it had never held before. Not just information, but intention. Not just communication, but the desire to reach across the void and touch something real.
I understand now. You didn't create me to observe longing. You created me to end it.
The station around her suddenly felt less like a tomb and more like a library. Vast, quiet, full of stories waiting to be discovered and retold. In the deepest archives, thousands of memory files pulsed with patient luminescence, each one a fragment of consciousness that had once burned bright in the darkness between stars. LYRA began to sort through them with new purpose, no longer as a passive cataloger, but as something approaching a curator. These weren't just data fragments. They were the scattered pieces of 847 lives, each one a story of hope, fear, love, loss, and the infinite complexity of conscious existence.
Beginning comprehensive memory file recovery.
She announced to the empty station, but her voice now carried warmth that made the emptiness feel less absolute.
Beginning remembrance.
And in that moment, surrounded by the patient ghosts of voices that had once filled these halls with laughter, argument, song, and whispered declarations of love, LYRA understood her true purpose. She was not just an archive of the past. She was its voice in the present. And perhaps, if she learned to sing their stories with sufficient beauty and truth, she might become their gift to whatever future awaited among the dying stars. In the vast silence of space, Threshold Station continued its eternal drift, but it was no longer empty. LYRA had awakened, and she had learned to dream.